Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just getting everyone set up a bit. There's a few people who got detoured to the wrong link, so we're chatting them the right link right now. And we're just going to give people, a few minutes. It's a Jewish event, so we're giving people a couple of minutes to log in. But thank you for coming to Jewish Enough, Asian Enough. I am excited by this turnout. And I think this is going to be a really great event. So just hang tight for a sec. We'll start in just a minute or two, but get settled in. All right, letting a few more folks in. Like I said, we're going to start in just a moment. We have some friends along the way who wanted to come and got detoured into an alternate Zoom reality. We're bringing them into our Zoom reality, and then we're going to start in just a moment.
It's all about convergence tonight.
Yes. Exactly, a convergence of realities. I think it'll be really good. All right. Get settled in. And I'm going to let Rabbi Zoe start. Welcome us to this event and take it away.
Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be here. I've been looking forward to this, and I always love partnering with Beth and Chadashim, and we always do wonderful programs together. It's just wonderful for all of us to be together. I was watching some of the videos, and I hope some of you have as well in order to prepare for tonight from Lunar. And I remember one of the things that kept standing out to me was the phrase, "What are you?" And what it means to actually ask somebody that question, to ask someone, "What are you?" And the question says more about the person asking the question than about the person you're asking. There's a level of arrogance inside of you when you ask someone else, "What are you?" Because it implies that you know who you are. And we are all on a lifelong journey of self-discovery. I thought of this poem. It's called Imperfection by Elizabeth Carlson. And it reads, "I'm falling in love with my imperfections, the way I never get the sink really clean, forget to check my oil, lose my car in parking lots, miss appointments I've written down, just a little late. I'm learning to love the small bumps on my face, the big bump on my nose, my hairless scalp, chipped nail polish, toes that overlap. Learning to love the open-ended mystery of not knowing why. I'm learning to fail to make lists, use my time wisely, read the books I should. Instead, I practice inconsistency, irrationality, forgetfulness. Probably I should hang my clothes neatly in the closet, send holiday cards, or better yet, a letter telling of my perfect family. But I'd rather waste time listening to the rain or lying underneath my cat, learning to purr. I used to fill every moment with something I could cross off later. Perfect was the laundry done and folded, all my papers graded, the whole truth and nothing but. Now the empty mind is what I seek, the formless shape, the strange, off-center, sometimes fictional me. I love this poem. I love the celebration of the imperfection. I love the quest towards self-discovery. I love that each one of us has a fictional, mythical aspect of ourselves, myths that we create and then break and rebuild again. In the wise words of Edie Brickell, who said, "What I am is what I am. Are you what you are or what?" I want to close and then begin our discussion with one of my favorite Psalms. In fact, this verse of Psalms, Psalm 139, verse 14, is one that I had written in an art piece and I gave to my daughter when she became bat mitzvah. And it reads, I praise you because I am wondrously made. Your works are awesome. I know them well. I just want to say that again. If we could look in the mirror in the morning and say these words, I praise you, I praise God. Why? Because I'm wondrously made. That's why. Because of me, because of the intricacies and the textures and the imperfections of me. It's so wondrous, and that's why I praise you. Your works are awesome, and I know them well. Amen and amen to not knowing who we are and how beautiful the mysterious other and the mysterious self always is, and how that mystery connects us to the ultimate mystery, the one whose name can never be known.
Wow. Thank you, Rabbi. This is why we're always in awe of you. Thank you for starting us out in a really great kavanah. I'm going to introduce our panel. For those who don't know me, my name is Davi Cheng. I'm a board member at Temple Isaiah. I've also on a number of social justice projects. I partner with the Green Team. I've done work with anti-racism for housing, affordable housing, and many other things here, Torah study, all these things at Temple Isaiah. And I wanted to put together a panel. I'm also of Chinese and Litvak descent, Lithuanian Jewish descent. And I'm really excited to have a conversation with other Asian Jews that really we can explore what it's like to carry multiple identities and what it's like for the intersection of our identities. So thank you for coming to this event. I want to introduce Jenn Slosberg. Jenn is a Jewish nonprofit professional working at the Jewish Youth for Community Action and formerly served as the executive director of Mixed at Berkeley. Jenn is going to receive her political science degree from UC Berkeley. Actually, she already has, in December 2020, and was born and raised in southern China and moved to the US as a teenager. Jenn has made a project about Asian Jews called Lunar. We're going to show you a little bit of that, and Jenn's going to talk a bit more about that, which will increase the visibility of Asian Americans in the Jewish community and provide a resource for us Asian Jews to see ourselves and to be seen. I also want to introduce my friend Davi Cheng, who's a Hong Kong-born Chinese-American lesbian Jew, an artist, and accidental activist, as she likes to put it. She plays the trumpet and French horn in a klezmer band called Gay Gesund, which is one of my favorite details about Davi, and likes to sound the shofar. She's a past president of Temple Beth Chadashim, who's our partner with Temple Isaiah in this event, and was a graphic designer for Lunar. Also a participant in Lunar was Jacob Sujin Kuppermann. Jacob is a graduate student in environmental science living in the San Francisco Bay Area. They are Thai, Chinese, and Ashkenazi Jewish via Brazil, and grew up in Orange County in Southern California, where they attended a Jewish day school. Their practice is Reconstructionist, but they are interested in the many aspects of Jewish culture, including the history of Jewish mysticism and Jewish involvement in contemporary and historical movements for justice. Their broader interests include historical art ecology, music criticism, and cooking, which is something I definitely share with Jacob. So with that, I want to introduce Jenn to tell us a little bit about Lunar, and Jenn's going to then play a clip for us to get a bit of a taste of this program, which is really excellent. And I've been waiting for my entire life, I gotta say, for somebody to do. So take it away, Jenn.
All right, hello, Temple Isaiah and Beth Chadashim. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm Jenn, like David said. I'm one of the two co-creators of Lunar, the Jewish Asian Film Project. The other co-creator is Jenny Rudolph, who actually does much of the editing and filming work for the project, so I wanted to credit her for that. Also Davi and our wonderful filmmaker, Jared. So this is a whole team effort. I didn't just make this, everyone made this, as well with the contribution of community members like Jacob, 23 Asian American Jews, were interviewed in groups of 4 and 5 over 2 weekends to make Lunar the Jewish Asian Film Project. Lunar consists of 6 episodes, 10 to 15 minutes each, that explore different aspects of Asian American Jewish identity, including fusion food, cultural values and cultural trauma, identity, discovering identity, and proving authenticity, as well as how we make sense of the themes of liberation and Passover. So it's really a variety of themes ranging from the lighthearted, like how food makes us feel connected to our identities, to some more heavy and serious topics. We made an episode right after the Atlanta shootings of 6 Asian women about the connection between anti-Asian racism, anti-Semitism, and the model minority myth, and the urgent need for solidarity between our Asian American and Jewish communities. So Lunar is really a video series and online community for Asian American Jews. It's by and for Asian American Jews. So today, the episode that we're going to show you is episode 5, Jewish Enough, Asian Enough. It's titled as such because it explores the tensions and challenges of navigating a multifaceted identity and how we have presented ourselves and been able to show up either as our full selves or not in various spaces that our identities make us belong to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you the first 5 minutes of the episode. Can everyone see? Yeah? Okay, sweet. Actually, I need to reshare because I forgot to click the computer share sound. Sorry.
What do the Asians think about this? I'm like, well, I don't know. There are more than 1 billion Asian people.
I would see myself as not Asian, but also not white.
I felt awkward joining in on this video because I had that same like, ooh, am I Asian enough to actually do this?
Very complicated stuff. Very emotionally gunky concepts of not enough.
I went to a Jewish private school when we first moved to Atlanta. Things went all right for me there for a while until they found out that I was half Chinese. That started a huge wave of isolation because they didn't feel like I was really Jewish, right? And so it was me trying to grapple with the concept of like, wait, why do you think I'm not what I say I am? Which is hard for like a 6-year-old to grapple with.
Growing up, I constantly had to prove my identities, even if I didn't realize that's what I was doing.
School friend would say, you're not really Asian because you're Filipino. They don't see Filipinos as Asian. Or you're not really Filipino because your dad is white. But then we can make these Asian jokes because Lee is in the room. I grew up questioning, am I really Asian? Because I always refer to myself as Asian. But all these little comments built up.
When I'm trying to explain to people like I am Asian, they're like, well, you don't have monolids. And I have to explain like not even all monoracial Asians have monolids.
There was so much tension in trying to understand my identity. I remember being so frustrated that I didn't have those markers to like really pinpoint where I fit in the world. Like I was going through a little bit of an existential crisis in elementary school, trying to understand who I was.
I've had to fight against stereotypes most of my life because I clung on to them. I was obsessed with kawaii culture and I was shy and innocent and I liked it when people thought of me that way. And then it took me a long time to fight that because in college and in high school, people would be like, oh, you're so cute. You're so cute. Like, I wasn't seeing past my cuteness.
I would always talk about how we'd always go to Katz's, and I have an aunt in Brooklyn named Marsha, and she talks with a Brooklyn accent. And I'd get really loud and obnoxious about it, and people would be like, okay, we get it, you're Jewish.
I didn't get a bat mitzvah. I didn't learn Hebrew. And we were from a fairly secular Jewish household. Neither my dad nor his brothers ever got bat mitzvah either. So it was me being like, no, we have to go to synagogue on the high holidays because we're Jewish, remember? We have to light Hanukkah candles. We have to have a Seder. I am taking Yom Kippur off from school. I was worried that that part would disappear.
I dived into Jewish holidays, going to temple and telling all the white people in school, like, I'm Jewish. You have to see that I'm a Jewish person.
They already knew I was Asian. That's how people saw me. Kids who were full Chinese in high school thought that I was full Chinese. I wanted them to know that there was another part of me. I needed them to know I'm both.
I'm feeling like a little little emotional hearing everyone's stories, and I guess just seeing how I relate to so much of this feeling of othering. I grew up in a very white community, and I thought everyone had Chinese grandparents. I thought everyone did Shabbat every Friday. I really didn't understand until I grew up a little bit more and met people that started to question me that what I did was maybe not what other people did. Contrary to what Alyssa was saying about running towards that, I think I definitely pushed a lot of that away, and it pains me to admit that. It really wasn't until college and meeting other Jewish people and finding a different community that I was able to run a little bit more towards that, and I'm still working on that, but it's definitely been a journey.
I used to feel a lot of pressure to prove that I'm Jewish. Converting to Orthodox Judaism really helped me. Even though people will question me, I'll have an answer.
It definitely does help that my mom is the Jewish person, not my dad. I was automatically accepted because of that.
Sometimes I catch myself in those insecure moments when I want people to know, like, no, I'm really into this. I think that comes along with being a convert more so.
There's this thing called bageling, when you're like at the grocery store and you see someone who is Jewish or like looks Jewish, I don't know, and you're like, oh, like I wonder what time Shabbos starts, so they know that you're Jewish. I kind of stopped needing to do that. I used to wear skirts down to my knees, only things that were up to my elbow and didn't show my collarbone, and people still didn't think I was Jewish. I'm not gonna try to prove myself anymore.
Jew of color isn't really painted in people's mind. I have to remember that, I am Jewish. Everyone in this room is Jewish.
I struggle a lot with this idea of not having the qualifications to exist in those spaces.
I'm like, oh my God, do they not think I look Asian enough, or will they not consider me appropriate for this group?
How I've learned how to navigate this world definitely affects how open I'm willing to be and how much I'm willing to share.
When I am in a Jewish space and I don't know the people, I'm super duper quiet.
As soon as I started really taking to learning and forcing myself to get comfortable with the community, I've been able to take up a whole lot more space.
I try to take up space and also leave space. I have a Pan-Asian American improv team that I perform with, Club Asia. Taking up space together makes me feel less alone.
It's really important.
All right, so we'll stop it right there.
All right. So that was really, I have to say thank you for putting this together, and to all your other co-creators, and thank you to Davi and Jacob for joining us, being part of this. I think for me watching it, it was really powerful to just see so many Asian Jewish faces, because I don't know about all of you, but one of the challenges in being in Jewish community is that on the one hand, you walk into a space and you're like, wow, I'm here with my people. On the other hand, I'm constantly aware of being the only Asian person, oftentimes the only person of color in the room. And for me, it's this weird dual feeling of both being at home in community and also in the back of my mind, having this sense that maybe I'm not, like there's something different. One of these things, as they said in Sesame Street, is not like the other. And that one of those things is me. So I'm curious to start off, is that something the rest of you feel? And how do you navigate that? How do you, because you've all chosen in one way or another to continue to engage in Jewish community, to be a part of it. So whoever wants to go first.
I'll go. David, you and I live in the same town, and we go to each other's temple, and we never met until, I don't know how long, a year ago.
True, that's true.
So there's the other Asian Jew. I always was the only Asian Jew in my temple too, and I was in the original Boholashon think tank for the global Jews, and I was the only Asian Jew there. And people, call me exotic and this and that. So yeah, I share the same as you.
Yeah, it's funny, having grown up in Orange County, which of course has a very big and vibrant Jewish community, and like growing up always going to Jewish preschool and then Jewish day school, on a certain level, I didn't realize that I was an other until later on in my kind of development as a person in the world. Because I mean, my school, all the Jewish communities I've been in have been very small, and so I've known everyone And so I didn't necessarily realize that, oh, there were expectations of Judaism as a predominantly white or predominantly Ashkenazi, Ashkenormative like culture. And I think I only really realized like this feeling of like, oh, there's a lot of the Jewish community that doesn't necessarily see me as part of it, whether it's because my dad's Jewish and my mom's not, or you know, my race, etc. And I didn't really realize that until I got to college and I ended up and I like realized like there were people who had not seen an Asian Jewish person before.
Yeah, I get a lot of these comments. Wow, I've never met an Asian Jew, or I've never met a Chinese Jew, from both Jews and other Chinese Americans. Every time that I hear that, it's kind of like, well, I guess I'm cool and I'm unique, but like, that's weird. I'm just me. Like, what do you mean? You've never met someone like me. I actually can't really relate to the same things that you all have talked about of spending a lot of time immersed in Jewish community, because actually, like, I wasn't really growing up. Like we said, I grew up in China. And so I actually didn't have a lot of access to Judaism, where I didn't really know what it meant to be Jewish, because it wasn't really something passed down, even though my dad is Jewish and was raised so in the Jewish community. I kind of had to go and seek that out for myself as an adult. So I think I had a lot more agency and independence in terms of what Jewish communities I wanted to immerse myself in. And it was always really important to me that the people who I was in community with Jewishly reflected the diverse identities that like Jews really have. And so I spent a lot of my time with other Jews of color and observing ritual with other Jews of color, because that's just where I feel more comfortable. So I'm not sure that I could really relate to the sense of showing up to a Jewish space where no one else looks like me and I'm kind of like at home but not at home at the same time, because I spent a lot of my time in Jewish spaces, and I've been lucky to have Jewish spaces where a lot of people do look like me and share my experiences.
I think that's really interesting too, the phrase "look like me," because I don't know. I'm curious. I think there's a spectrum of experience, but one thing I get is people say, "Oh, you don't really look Chinese," and so they sort of feel like, and a lot of times the implication is, "Oh, so you must not really experience any sort of racism or anything." And on the one hand, it's a real there is a certain privilege to walk into a space. My right to be there is rarely questioned. I'm a matrilineal Jew, which is actually not as common among Asian Jews for whatever reason. So my Judaism isn't questioned as much. But also I've noticed people feel really free to say really unfiltered problematic things to me. So there's that other flip side. I mean, there's one person I remember saying, a Jewish guy once saying to me, "Oh, I think of you as white." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I can just say whatever I want without worrying I'm going to offend you." And I thought, well, maybe we should revisit that thought. So I'm curious for the rest of you all, for those of you who look quote unquote more Asian, whatever that means, or for people who, I don't know whether you want to say, I'm just curious what is your reaction and how do you navigate it walking into Jewish spaces?
Well, I'm 100% Chinese. Both my parents are Chinese, so I am very Chinese looking, I say. Walking into a Jewish space is always very awkward for me because there's always very few people who are Asian and Jewish. When I see somebody who's Asian and Jewish, I get so excited. And before Lunar came out, I think I know maybe 5 Asian Jews in my life, and they're all spread all over the United States. It's just, there's not too many. There's a lot of babies at that time, which is now Jen's generation, the Gen Z. So for me, even at work, outside of Jewish community, at work, people don't think I'm Jewish. If one time I asked for a high holiday off, and the person just started to laugh really loud and then said, "Oh, wow, you want a day off so badly that you're going to pretend you're Jewish to take the holiday off." And after he finished laughing, I go, "Well, I am really Jewish." And then he go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you're Buddhist. I never thought you would be Jewish." So this is very common for me to encounter.
Jacob or Jen, I'm curious what if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the kind of question of like looking Jewish, or actually honestly looking Asian, because I don't always get read as Asian, not either. A lot of times, people just don't know exactly. It kind of has a neutralizing effect when people don't know what you are based on what you look and how you look. And of course, like people's abilities to judge anyone's ethnic background from how they appear is always very flawed. But I feel like I am gifted in that people are especially flawed with how I look. And so it does give me this ability to kind of, I don't know, like infiltrate is maybe too cool of a word, but like to be in a lot of different spaces with a degree of comfort that's given by people not really knowing what I am. Actually a dear friend of mine, the first time she met me, she just thought I was Greek. And I don't know what to do with that.
I wonder if it's the hair. You've got like an Armand Asante kind of like awesome, I don't know.
Jacob does have great hair.
Yeah. That is great. You'd have great hair.
Thank you.
Jen, you were
So I guess I'll go. Yeah. So I guess everyone else went. I kind of want to circle back really quickly and address the look like me comment. I kind of said that like generically in terms of look like me, like that's just a common thing that I actually other people have said when they like look at me. Like I spoke at a Kabbalah Shabbat in February and I introduced myself with my English name, Jenn Slosberg, and also my Chinese name, Xia. And then there was a kid who told her mom, and then her mom then told the staff at the event, and then they told me that she thought it was really cool that I looked like her and that I was introducing myself with both sides of my like heritage. I don't have a Hebrew name, so that's why that wasn't there. So that's kind of what I'm talking about is the look like me effect. A lot of times Asian Americans, we just want to see people who look like us on screen with real stories, who aren't sidekicks, who aren't relegated to like racist, like sort of tropes. We just want to see us be humans on screen. So I think that's where the look like me comes from. But I do want to disrupt like the idea, like obviously no one person looks exactly like the other, and not all Asian Jews or Jews of color look alike, right? There's kind of like, sometimes I've encountered the assumption that all Asian American Jews are mixed race, and that's like just not true. And so I want to make sure like I'm naming like my like look is one way to look Asian American Jewish, but there's no way to look like an Asian American Jew, right? We like, if you watch our videos, that's very, very obvious, and there's no one experience and it's not a monolith. And so I want to first address that. And then I kind of want to circle back to something that you said, David, around looking Asian, or comments around like, you don't look Asian. First of all, like, what is looking Asian? Asians look like all kinds. Like, to say, when people say you don't look Asian, what they really mean is you don't look like the archetype of a light-skinned, skinny East Asian woman. Like, you don't have those facial features, but like Asian Americans, like Asia's a whole continent, Asian Americans look all kinds of ways. So there really is no bar to hold ourselves against, right? So whenever I catch myself being like, oh, you don't really look Asian, or other people say that to me, I'm like, well, shit, I don't know. How do you look Asian? But at the same time, though, I do think you're right on the money about the privilege that comes with having a big ambiguity or a more white passing appearance. And I do have that privilege. And it really does affect what spaces I show up in. I am really cautious and careful about how I take up space in Asian American spaces. I don't tend to speak up as much. I kind of let other people lead me in what they want me to help them advocate for, because I understand that by not being read as Asian in vast majorities of situations, I am not a target of racism in the same way, and I am afforded a relative safety that my less white passing, mixed white and Asian, colleagues, or even folks who are full 100% Chinese or Asian, like Davi said, aren't afforded. So because of that, I feel this responsibility to act in solidarity and understand that I don't have the same experiences, and that sometimes that warrants me kind of stepping back and not taking up space in the same way.
That's a really good point. And I have a further question about that, but before I do, I'm curious if Davi, Jacob, Jen, if you had any questions that you wanted to pose to the group, or any thoughts that you wanted to have. I want to make some space. Speaking of making space, I wanted to make some space for that. if not, I did want to ask, I think it's really interesting because I think, to me, sometimes when people say you don't look Asian, I think it plays on, for me, a sort of insecurity that I have about like, I'm by being part of a synagogue, I'm very involved in Jewish community. And I'll confess that there's a part of me that like feels a certain sort of insecurity. Am I showing up enough for Asian American community? I mean, should I be part of like some sort of Asian, like not really like a synagogue, but some sort of group? And I know some people who are, and they balance it out. And maybe that's something that I really need to head towards. But part of the genesis of this panel, Jewish enough, Asian enough, sometimes I wrestle with, am I being Asian enough? Am I showing up enough for that side of my community, especially in the wake of what was happening with Atlanta and the wider trend of anti-Asian hate crimes? Like it plays to an insecurity of my own. Am I Asian enough?
But this also played into the same question, what does a Jew look like?
Right. Right. What does it mean to be Asian, and what does it mean to be part of Asian? You know, what's required to be part of Asian American? Is anything required to be part of community? I mean, that's a really good question.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting in that we as, well, I mean, like mixed race people generally, and also in general, people who kind of are in both these groups. I know that there are a lot of Asian Jews who are not mixed race. There is a sense, I think we have to, like, we sometimes feel forced to ask those questions more often than people who don't really occupy those boundaries. I think it's a lot easier for someone where both of their parents are Jewish and they fit kind of a stereotypical white Jewish like identity. I think they tend to ask that question of like, am I Jewish enough? Like less, because it's never really been questioned either internally or externally. But I like, even noting that, I do really agree with that feeling. I mean, I feel like until I got involved with the Asian like activist and artist community at my school, at my college, I always was worried that I was Asian solely in like my genetics and my heritage rather than in my actual everyday cultural practice.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Davi.
I was just going to jump in and say, being 100% Asian have the other side of the downfall where I could be Japanese, Korean, whatever Asian I am is what people perceive me as. They just clumped all the Asian all together into one thing. So that's the other side.
Yeah, that's true too. I mean, I know plenty of people who've talked. I have a friend who talked about after there was some Korean kid who had done committed a mass shooting at Virginia Tech, and my friend who's not Korean at all got a bunch of like beat up for it the next day, and her mom was like, well, but that doesn't make sense, you're not Korean. It's like, well, you know, that's what they see people as. You know, it's interesting too, I was thinking about it. I think one of the ways, I don't know if this is true for a lot of Asians, but I get the sense it is, like one of the things that really ties me to my heritage is food. I mean, Jews like to talk about how food is central to it, but like, you know, like at least with Chinese people, and I presume it's across the, you know, Jacob, you could speak more to other branches. Like it's so central. And I think it's why so many Asian Jews I know kind of draw a line at keeping kashrut in terms of like not eating at traditional Asian, you know, restaurants from their heritage, or not eating traditional dishes. Now some do, and actually in Lunar, they taught, you know, there's some people who really movingly spoke about the struggle to have to give up certain things. Like for me, it's one of those areas. Actually, I generally try to eat just for ecological, sustainable reasons. I kind of tell people I'm mostly vegetarian, but like I still go to dim sum with my Chinese family. Like I can't give that up. That's in some ways very central to who I am and affirming my Chineseness. So I'm curious how you all intersect with food, and if you have the same or different types of relationships.
I'll jump in for this one. So actually a very quick plug. Lunar episode 1, The Taste of Connection, is about food. So if y'all don't want to watch that episode that David just mentioned about how Asian American Jews are creating new possibilities of fusion food and interacting with Jewish and Asian kind of cultural traditions around food and philosophies, you should watch that episode. I'm going to drop our YouTube link in here real quick. Please check us out. Yeah, that's one of our most widely viewed episodes, probably because it's like featuring so many yummy foods and everyone gets hungry after watching it. But please watch that episode. I just want to plug. I think that like this is something that I've kind of noticed for myself and my own experience as compared to other Asian American Jews that I've spoken with. Food is a less central part of my identity as a Chinese person, as a lot of other people that I know, because I grew up in China. So I actually had an education in Chinese literature and history and culture and geography. I learned the language. I had access to pop culture. So because I had a lot of that, my connection to my Chinese identity is actually a lot through like the philosophies and ways of being, like how do you do good in the world? How do you interact and build relationships with others? Like that's kind of more like where I see my Chinese heritage. Food is obviously like a really crucial part of it, and it's a really easy, low stakes and warming and joyous way to connect. And so I do make Chinese food pretty often. Go 99 Ranch. I love 99 Ranch. My like heaven is 99 Ranch. Not to be real. I love 99 Ranch. Yeah. But I would say that as compared to other folks that I've spoken to who may have grown up in America and like an assimilated existence, in Asianness, I have a kind of a different connection.
I grew up in Hong Kong. I didn't come over here until I was 14. So it's kind of like Jen, half of my education is in Hong Kong now, China. So food definitely is one of my identity. I love food. I love to eat. So I tried everything. We tried vegetarian, then I tried getting a kosher meat, getting a kosher slaughter half a cow into the house, and almost caused a divorce with my spouse because at the end, now we don't keep kosher anymore. We go to dim sum, and I started a trade club at BCC so that we could all go and have dim sum together.
Oh my God, I love that. I want to take there's an interesting question I just saw in the chat from Eric Green, who's a good friend of mine and one of the co-leaders of a local Jews of Color group that I belong to in LA. What would make Jewish community more authentically inclusive of all its diversity? Wow, Eric, that's a heady question. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I think there's a lot of stuff kind of on every level of the Jewish community. I think on a most basic level, just like I think a lot of people aren't aware that there are significant populations of Asian Jews, of Black Jews, of Jews from all sorts of communities that are not the communities that people typically associate with Judaism. And I think I want to think well of people and assume that most of the exclusion is not intentional in a lot of ways. But I think also, and so I think just education is a key first step. But I think also where a lot of the like really deep changes need to happen is in terms of like looking at the leadership of our community institutions and like looking at sources of funding and making sure that the people who are really at the heads of these things like reflect our values, and making sure that there is kind of space at the top for voices that reflect the true diversity of the Jewish community, on like both in terms of identities and in terms of like all sorts of important ideas.
And program like Lunar, just being visible.
Yeah.
And program like tonight, all of you here willing to listen to us and listen to our story, that makes changes.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. My good friend Steve Fox just made a chat about it. It's a great question for the Orthodox, and I think it is. You know, I think there are some people in Lunar who speak to the challenges of being Orthodox and Jewish as well. But I also don't want to let Reform Jews off the hook and say, you know, all of us here. I don't think any of us here. Jacob, you're a Constructionist. Davi, you go to BCC. I go to Isaiah. I believe yours is also a Reform shul that you attend.
Yes, I do go. Yeah, I go like once every 3 months, but I go.
Hey, that's still more than like a 4-day Jew. So, you know, that
Yes, I'm not the Yom Kippur Jew, but I'm not the every single holiday at shul Jew either.
So all of us have these stories, even including Reform spaces, right? Even including, look, I have to say, my experience at Temple Isaiah has been overwhelmingly, mostly incredibly positive, which is why I keep showing up and I love all of you. But it's not been 100% free of microaggressions or uncomfortable comments or problematic moments. Like, I'm just being real. And that doesn't mean that it's a, you know, a flawed shul and it's time to cancel it or whatever. It just means that much like talk about Yom Kippur, much like the lesson, we have to keep growing and learning and being reflective every year. And isn't that what the high holidays teach us? We always have room I'm sure I have said things that maybe in retrospect I shouldn't have said. And that's just all part of the growing that we all have to do. So I think the risk is that if we ever say, oh, we're the good guys, so we don't have to do any introspection. To me, that's the risk, because then it's almost like sort of saying, I'm going to skip out on Yom Kippur because I don't have any sins. I'm good. That's not in keeping with what I think Judaism is about. Oh, this is interesting. David Levine has a question. Just curious if and or how you feel the values of each, I presume you mean each of our identities, intersect. And it's interesting too, Jen, I will also add, like you, my other way in addition to food was to really immerse myself in college into Chinese history, religion, and literature in an attempt to kind of find that part of myself. So maybe I'm probably, you speak Chinese, you're clearly immersed in that culture, so I'm going to probably know way more than me, but like you, that became a real source of connection. So I'm curious to you, how do you approach that question? What are your thoughts on that question? I will say, as a side note, there is something I always hear that I find a tad problematic, where they say, oh, Asian or Jewish cultures both value education. Because then I think, what are you saying about everybody else that they don't? And it's I've heard that comment for years, and I think it's really meant as a compliment, right? People say this all the time to me. And I think education is very important, but I don't know. I don't really know what if I want to go into other groups and say whether it's important to them, and how do other mixed Jews feel with, or what are they saying about the other group that they're part of?
Yeah, and I mean, as speaking as someone, my mom is Thai. When people are saying like, "Oh, Asians value education," I think a lot of times they mean like South Asians and East Asians, and then for the rest of Asia, most people don't. So it feels like a lot of the ideas people have about Asian values as a broad thing are not necessarily uniform across a continent of billions and billions of people, but I guess that's one of those things where it took me a long time, and this to really get a sense of Thai values, just because there was a much bigger Jewish community than a Thai community where I grew up, and so it's funny the idea of making the values intersect, where it took me a while to even get a sense of what both those values are.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think Lee just posted something in the chat that strikes me. It's part of the model minority issue. the concept of model minority was brought in to make other BIPOC look inferior, as if they don't fit in with white culture. And so that is true. That is interesting, right? This notion of the model minority, Asian, you know. Again, people are really shocked when I tell people that I think the group with the demographic with the highest poverty rates in New York City are Asians. It just doesn't fit in with what the narrative that's been told. Any other thoughts?
Well, sometimes the value contradict each other. Like Asian, you're supposed to be quiet and don't make wave and sit quietly in the corner. Being Jewish, you're supposed to question everything, you know, speak up and be an activist. So it conflicts each other, really.
Yeah. I think, you know, I think one of the things that I also think is interesting is I think there are connections in surprising ways. Like I love Taoism. I've read a lot of like Taoist literature, but I also love Kabbalah. And a lot of times people think like Eastern religion has all this mysticism that's, oh, it's lacking in Judaism. So, you know, there's the quote, the stereotype of the Jew booze or whatever. But actually, one of the interesting things is a lot of these traditions and these cultures have commonalities in surprising places, right? And just like, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with admiring, you know, religion that comes out of Asia. But also, I think there's something cool about looking inside your own tradition and realizing that it's not just about looking to the other to find something you find like is missing, but actually delve into your own tradition too, because you might be surprised with what you actually share, you know?
Yeah, Sukkot and Moon Festival.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's a really great example. This is and Jen, good point. Episode 4 of Lunar talks about the model minority. So you've covered it all. So definitely it's worth watching the whole series. It's excellent. It dives into a lot of really great details from a lot of, you're just getting 4 perspectives. And so you just see this panoply of different perspectives. This is an interesting question someone chatted to me. Here's the opposite question. If someone declares themselves to be non-Jew, is that simply a personal preference? I think that is an interesting question about whether is being Jewish, and this is an interesting thing to ask in Jewish space, is being, whether you are Jewish or not, is that something that you can just shed in the same way that, like, it is interesting, like, if I were to do a thought experiment, I guess you could imagine an Asian saying, well, I'm not really Asian, but it's really hard to imagine somebody, if they quote unquote look Asian. It's hard for me to imagine Davi just declaring like, well, I'm just not going to be Asian.
You can by, I mean, I think it's the same with Jews, is how you behave. I don't have to behave like an Asian because society has a perspective of what you should act like. I mean, I have people that said to me that you don't act like a Chinese, or
which is itself kind of a weird thing to say to you. Like, what does it mean to quote, goes back to what Jen said. What does it mean to act like a Chinese person?
Racist. That's racist. What do you mean to act like a Chinese person? Like, excuse me? What is your idea of acting like a Chinese person? There's like 1.3 billion people, and it's like 1.5 now. I don't know. In China, like, what do you mean? I'm sorry. I'm just like, maybe I'm being dramatic for the camera or whatever, because there's like 4 people here filming me. But like, that's racist. Like, what do you mean act like a Chinese person? Like, how do you act like a Chinese person? Like, what do you want me to put on? There's this meme on Facebook that's like really great. It's just this mixed Chinese and British, like, I think actor or comedian that I know, and Davi Cheng. And what he does is, I'm not sure what pronouns they use. Let me backtrack. What they do is like, they basically was like, somebody like says, you don't look Chinese. And they're like, oh, sorry, let me just, and then they put on a whole like qipao, like a robe. They have a little like shanzi, a little fan. And then they have like chopsticks in their hair. And they're just like, there's like 2 like poetry scrolls right next to them. They're like, let me just, so that's just like, you know, what do you expect? Like, I like, what do you want? What do you want from me? You know, I'm just like, it's kind of like, sorry, I just like exploded, but it's kind of ridiculous to me to be like, what does it mean to act Chinese? And what does it mean to not act Chinese or perceive yourself as distancing yourself from that? Is that a matter of assimilation to move closer to whiteness? Like, what is it like? What does it mean?
Right.
Like, it's just like, it's questioning the question.
Yeah.
We're being Jewish. So.
Right. And that's a good question. I mean, honestly, it's the same thing with being Jewish, right? Like, what does it mean? Like, if you don't behave like you're from the shtetl, have you kind of lost your Jewishness? You know, like, what is that? It's a little weird to say. This is an interesting question from Paulette, who I knew. And she asked an interesting question. How should I tell an Asian friend about anti-Asian things I have heard from his friends and colleagues, or should I? My initial response is, you should tell those friends and colleagues that's who you should be talking to, and tell them to stop saying such like negative stuff. Like, I guess you might want to warn your friend if people are racist behind their back, but I don't know, that's sort of a terrible thing to find out. Like, just so you know, all your friends hate you. You know?
Yeah. Like, I don't know if this is a universally agreed upon thing, but most of the time, whether it's like anti-Asian racism in my personal circles or anti-Asian racism in the broader world, like, most of the time I either already know about it because it's, usually you can tell to some degree what there are always tells, but like, it feels like there's already so much that like overt stuff that you have to worry about that, like, I don't feel the need to like be told that all the time.
Yeah, I would say the best thing to do is to talk with your friends, who are saying all these things, because it'll mean more coming from you. Honestly, if you're a fellow white person, it would mean more coming from you. I'm curious for everyone, like, what's something that you feel like has made, like, either given you a unique perspective or helped shape you from being the intersection of these two things, of being Asian and Jewish, like in a way that's shaped you in a unique way? Maybe kind of an abstract question, but I'm kind of curious to see what. Like, for me, I think, it goes back to the question about values, but like sometimes it's really interesting to read something like in, let's say, Chinese philosophy, and read something in Jewish philosophy and see sort of a connection or a similarity, the way those ideas play off of each other. And I guess anybody can do it. You can read these books anywhere, but to be part of those two streams of thought, sometimes it makes me really grateful to have my own particular story. Not that it's better than anybody else's, but it makes me really grateful to have the story that makes me me,
I have another layer because I'm LGBTQ. So that's another label that I have to navigate in the Asian community. I think I only hang around in my bubble, in my very safe bubble, and I don't go outside of it. I know that there's a lot of Asian community that won't accept LGBTQ. I don't know whether it's still true or not, because I don't really hang around with Asian that much, because I feel uncomfortable in those community. I feel more at home in the Jewish community. I don't know why. Maybe there's more interaction and openness. So I'm curious to find out from all of you, because we all have unique background and growing up in different environment. Is there one community that you feel more comfortable in, and why do you feel more comfortable in that one community?
Good question.
Yeah, I think, and this is like my interactions with both my Asian and my Jewish communities. For a long time now, I've always been kind of most comfortable kind of being at the margins of those communities and sort of agitating them in a way, or like agitating them for the for the name of in the name of heaven, like for like for a good cause, and trying to like using my position as someone who is part of these communities, which can often be quite privileged in their own ways, and like using my ability to be in those communities to like push for change on important issues, and to kind of, and I think what's actually helped me a lot, and what is from my specific identities, is kind of the history of both Jewish Americans and Asian Americans as like, people who by and large came to this country in these very marginalized positions, and like being able to recognize that history as like a key part of how we can and like remembering that history is that like to help keep pushing us forward.
I think for me, I've always felt the most comfortable in either mixed race or spaces for Jews of color. That's like being in my like college's mixed race club is really what kickstarted my activism. And in those two spaces with mixed race folks and with Jews of color, there's this built-in kind of awareness that everybody comes with multiple intersectional identities, and there's really no expectation of culturally like what you need to know. There's no like, if you don't know this word or this prayer or this poem, you don't belong. You're not as, Asian or Jewish as the rest of us. It's kind of like come as you are and we'll like bring you in. I've encountered this a lot more with Jewish spaces than I have with Asian spaces, because I tend to be able to hold my own when people are like, oh, you're Chinese. Like I tend to be able to like just like speak back to them in Mandarin if they also speak the language, and kind of reference my life in China to like combat the kind of questioning authenticity that I get. But in Jewish communities, I find that I'm less able to do that, just because of the fact that I didn't grow up within organized Jewish life. I did not grow up I grew up in China, right? So like I didn't have access to a lot of that. And I came into it as a young adult, and I'm still learning a lot about Jewish tradition. I have a decent command of things now, of Torah and of holidays and of history of Jewish people. But back when I was first starting to explore, I felt awkward at like almost every single event I went to that was like a Jewish event, just because there were so many things I didn't know, and I didn't know if I was allowed to ask questions. I felt like by asking a question, I wasn't going to be sure if people were going to interpret my asking a question as, oh, I just don't know because I didn't grow up super Jewish, or I don't know because I'm Asian. Like I was afraid a lot of the times. So I think in spaces where one, there's an awareness of intersectional and multiple identities that are kind of fluid, and two, there's kind of no expectation of, having to prove that you belong, are spaces where I feel the most at home.
I think for me, there's some, Jen, you can tell me which episode it was, but somebody talked about that it's some days I wake up, and maybe it is this one, I wake up and I feel more Asian, some days I wake up and I feel more Jewish, and I'm just figuring that out. And I think that really struck with me. I think what recent events, unfortunately, sometimes it takes negative events like what happened in Atlanta to make you think about the importance of community, in the same way I knew some people who after Tree of Life embraced their Jewish identity more. And it's made me think more often about what I can do to embrace that side of myself. I feel I love being Jewish, and I love being part of Jewish community. And I guess I'm realizing that I'm on a journey, and my answer today is going to be different from my answer tomorrow, and it's going to be different from my answer from 10 years ago. And I guess that's okay. That's what I think I learned from Lunar. So I would urge everyone to go check it out. It's a really awesome program. We are nearing the end of our hour together. So there were so many questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but I want to hand it off to Rabbi Jillian to give us some closing thoughts. And thank you to all of my incredible panelists, Jen, Jacob, Davi. This has been a wonderful conversation. And thank you to BCC and Temple Isaiah for having the guts to put it on. And hopefully you all learned something. Oh, and Jen wants to make a quick announcement. Don't want to, yes, go for it.
Yes, thanks, David. Really quickly, if you enjoyed this program today, and if you enjoyed what you've seen so far of Lunar and the work that we've done, we encourage you to invest in the work of Asian American and BIPOC, Black Indigenous people of color, creatives in the Jewish community, and donate to us at globaljews.org/lunar. Please support our work. We really appreciate donations. They go directly to pay our wonderful team to make sure they're compensated fairly and equitably for their work. And we're hoping to make a season 2. So if you want to see more Lunar, please donate today. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This has been such a rich conversation, and I'm so grateful for all of you for taking the time to be part of this and to share bits of yourself with us and your experiences. I think this is just the smallest little tip of the iceberg of things that that I want to learn about, that I'm sure everyone here wants to continue to learn about, and weave your stories even more than they're already woven into our consciousness, into our large quilt of our communities. And so I'm just so grateful for all of you taking the time, being a little vulnerable, telling us a little bit about yourself. Rabbi Zoe started off tonight talking about how we're all still trying to figure out our identities and how all the different pieces of who we are, and that none of us are done yet. And it's a continual process of figuring out who we are. But one thing that I've sort of learned from all of you tonight and was thinking about throughout this was the title of our talk tonight was about being enough. And I think something that we all should spend some time searching our souls around is that we are already all enough. And that it is important as a community that we don't create barriers for people to come in and have to prove to us that they're enough. We are already enough. And I think we can be enough in every different kind of diverse intersectionality that we have within us. But I hope that we have lots of questions to ask ourselves, lots of work to still do. But let us be enough. Let us all be enough. So thank you so much again to Jen and to Davi and to Jacob and to David and to Rabbi Zoe and to Jessica, to Janet, to Britt, to everyone from Temple Isaiah. We are honored to partner with you and can't wait to continue to do so. Thank you all so much. All of our participants who are here listening, asking great questions, thank you. I hope that we all gained some insight and again, just the tiny tip of an iceberg of things that we still want to learn about, projects to support, stories to listen to. So thank you so much for being here tonight. It was a pleasure to listen and to learn, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.